Welcome, Dolphins fans, haters, and everyone in between to your favorite show discussing the greatest franchise in sports, the Miami Dolphins. This is the PhinsPod. My name is Moose, your host, and today we're going to touch on the story that just never dies. With recent developments surrounding Deshaun Watson in Houston, Miami's name continues to be brought up, and we'll look at the viability of that conversation. We'll also take a look at the defensive players that the Dolphins coaching staff is working with down in Mobile for the Senior Bowl this week. We'll talk about that, and as always, we'll take a quick look at the latest stories published over at PhinsPod.com. Before we get started, I'd really appreciate if you could leave a review on Apple Podcasts for the show. It really helps us out and helps other Dolphins fans find us and join the pod. Without further ado, let's dive in.
It wouldn't have mattered who they hired. They could have hired Vince Lombardi. They could have hired anyone you want. They could have hired Eddie Robinson. Deshaun Watson was going to hold fast to his idea to request that trade. And I don't think it's a reflection in any way, shape, or form about the new general manager, Nick Caserio, the new head coach, David Culley. This is about the owner, Cal McNair. This is about the organization and the way it has been run. This is about Deshaun Watson putting down his foot and taking a page out of the NBA playbook that has increasingly become a part of the NFL playbook, that we've seen players like Khalil Mack and Jalen Ramsey basically tell teams, I'm not going to play for you anymore. And we saw it back in the day with Carson Palmer in Cincinnati. It didn't get quite as much attention then as it does now. But here's a player, a transcendent talent in the prime of his career, who is dug in, and the Texans don't want to trade him and say they're not going to trade him, and that's fine. They're going to have a problem on their hands moving forward. And I would think, in the end, it's a battle they can't win. So eventually, you would think that they'll come to the recognition, the realization that it's best to move on, get whatever you can in return, maximize the return, and turn the page. Because Deshaun Watson is saying goodbye to the organization. And you can't boil it down any other way than but to say, Houston has a problem.
So the Dolphins hired former NFL quarterback and now position coach Charlie Frye to act as their new quarterback coach. People everywhere took this as a sign of them potentially hiring an offensive coordinator internally. So the reason for that, and we talked about this a bit last week, but when an offensive coordinator brings in and implements a new offense into a team, they often like to have a support staff of offensive lineman coach, receiver coach, quarterback coach, various position coaches to help coach up their players to play in the system that they're bringing. So the fact that the Dolphins have promoted Lemuel Jean-Pierre from assistant O-line coach to, head O-line coach, and also brought in Charlie Frye as a quarterback coach, points to not a lot of turnover happening on the offensive side of the ball, at least from a coaching perspective. So it could be that some of these outside guys that they've talked to aren't really looking to move things a lot internally for Miami, or equally likely, they could just be promoting either Eric Studsville, the current running back coach, or George Godsey, the tight ends coach. That way, they already have the staff sort of filled in, and they can hit the ground running. The second thing people are taking away from the hiring of Charlie Frye is that the team is standing by Tua Tagovailoa. Frye worked with Tua in high school at the Elite 11 camp, which brought Tagovailoa's name onto the national stage. But recent developments outside of Miami's control leaves a lot of speculation about who's going to be taking the snap for the Phins. Obviously, you're all well aware that Houston Texans quarterback Deshaun Watson wants out of Texas, and his ideal landing spot would be with the Dolphins. That was a report that came out a little over a week ago. So people fussed and fought about that rumor, including us here at PhinsPod. We took a stance that the Dolphins should continue their process and build with what they have, rather than selling the farm to gain a single asset, no matter how great that asset is. And oh boy, Deshaun Watson is a great asset. But the Texans' last hope of appeasing Watson and keeping him there was likely to hire Chiefs offensive coordinator Eric Bieniemy. However, the Texans went with someone I have never heard of and hired David Culley. So Culley has been an NFL coach for 27 years, so it's not like he came out of nowhere. I mean, he's been in the league for nearly 3 decades, and he most recently spent his time in Baltimore as their wide receiver coach. Just a side note, the Ravens had the league's worst passing attack this year, so I don't know why you would reach out to their passing game coordinator to become your head coach. So following that news, no surprise, Deshaun Watson was not thrilled that instead of taking their suggestion and hiring, the leader of one of the most powerful offenses the league has ever seen in Eric Bieniemy, instead they hired a journeyman guy who probably was the only one who was willing to take the job with all the restrictions that Easterby and McNair were going to put on the head coach. So they hired him, and now Deshaun Watson has formally requested a trade. That trade from the Texans appears to move us one step further in this process of a long-term divorce between the two. And this is a process that we have never seen before. Never in history has a quarterback in the peak of his prime, perennial Pro Bowler, and a potential champion just picked up and left. Now, we have never seen one get traded, let alone force their own way out of town, because it's just so hard to find competent quarterback play, not even elite, like competent quarterback play, that when you come across good play, it's hard to give up. The last time we really saw this was, if you think about Kirk Cousins, sort of his free agency and how he was able to really cash out. And Kirk Cousins can't even sniff Deshaun Watson's jockstrap in terms of talent and skill set. So we just have never seen this before, and that's something that's important. This is something that would really change the face of the league. It would be game-changing for how players, similar to the NBA, they'd be able to set precedent here, which would inherently give more power to the players. And that's overall a good thing. If Deshaun Watson's able to control his destiny, his career, that's going to set a great precedent for other really good players in horrible situations to make moves. And it will also equally hold franchises accountable, because they know in order to acquire good talent, they got to clean their own house up first. So I think Miami's going to continue to be linked to this trade. Just for simple reason. They have the most to give up. Not only did Watson say that Miami was preferred destination because of what's been built with Brian Flores and Chris Greer. Don't know how much of that has to do with the social justice aspect or the fact that Miami's very open to hiring minority coaches, unlike the Houston Texans, and the way they've sort of operated in the past. So in that way, I see why Deshaun Watson wants to come to Miami. And I also totally understand why the media as a whole and the NFL world just links the Dolphins over to the Texans. And it would be foolish not to entertain the conversation. I mean, Deshaun Watson is a top 5 quarterback. And at the right price, you cannot say no to a top 5 NFL quarterback. However, Chris Greer does have the luxury of options. So there is also no need of overextending just because you really want Deshaun Watson. Would he make the Dolphins immediate Super Bowl contenders? Potentially. But so would continuing to stay on the track that the Dolphins are on right now and build around Tua. So there is a chance that this could really just be a win-win for Miami. A great time to be a Dolphins fan. You could end up with all your assets still intact and a bright young quarterback, or end up with a potential Hall of Fame quarterback halfway between 20 and 30. You might not have those assets, you might have limited cap, but you just got a potential Hall of Fame quarterback, which is the name of the game in the NFL if you're an executive. But regardless, I just don't think this topic is going away. We're going to continue to hit on it and discuss any developments throughout the weeks. Anything happens, stay tuned here on the PhinsPod. We're going to talk about it. Everything related to the Dolphins we talk about here. So be sure to subscribe if you're watching on YouTube, or to subscribe if you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. However, my overall estimation of the Deshaun Watson situation is that if it were to happen, it would likely happen prior to the beginning of the new league year in March, just so both franchises can sort of set themselves up in free agency with the draft, figure out how it is they want to build their team. So if the trade's going to happen, it's going to happen soon. Chatter should start to pick up around the Super Bowl about whether or not there's actually, fire here. But my guess, Deshaun Watson does not end up a Houston Texan. He also does not end up a Miami Dolphin. I just don't think that's how the Dolphins operate. That's not what they're building. It doesn't kind of go with the overall plan that they have. But again, this is a wild card that no one saw coming. No one could have predicted. So I guess you have to adapt to that. And if Miami does adapt and manage to land Deshaun, that's a great power move in the AFC. However, if they stick to their guns, I still think they're building something special in Miami. Last week, we took an initial look at the 2021 Senior Bowl roster that the Dolphins coaching staff will get to work with. Now we're going to take a look at the defensive side of the ball to see if there are any prospects who might stand out as fits for the Dolphins defense. As we discussed before, this is a really great opportunity for Miami's coaches to get hands-on with a bunch of prospects who may not have been able to showcase themselves completely due to the past year we've had and the limits that they've been placed under due to COVID restrictions at the college level. In terms of positions of need, just think back to the season. Yes, Miami's defense was stout and consistent throughout the majority of the year, especially in that middle portion of the season, but there are definitely positions which could still use upgrades or at least some value depth. So I'm thinking linebacking core. Ideally, a run thumper who would not be a total liability in the passing game, similar to Raekwon McMillan a couple years ago, but the loss of him and the eventual loss of Landon Roberts did hurt the Dolphins' ability to stuff the run. And similarly, if they do have a run-stuffing linebacker like a Landon Roberts, they really do expose themselves to be, eaten up in the passing game. So that's why Jerome Baker, as helpful and vital as he is to the defense's operation, getting another piece to help supplement him and keep him fresh throughout the game will help the defense so much. Another position that comes to mind is nickel corner. Nick Needham's coming up on an expiring contract, and Miami may look to get younger and potentially cheaper at the position with the rookie, assuming Needham wants to get paid. Now, he won't get paid a ton. I don't think he's like a premier, nickel corner. Miami may be able to bring him back at a solid price as some good depth piece, but you could see the Dolphins try to bolster the nickel secondary unit as well. So the defensive line as well is something the Dolphins need to focus on, specifically the edge pass rusher position. We don't have a genuine pass rusher who can be counted on in big moments. Think about the Cam Wakes of the world. Before that, Jason Taylor. The guy who you knew on 3rd and long with the game on the line was going to cause pressure. He might not get there every time, but he would cause pressure. Miami never really had that last season. As great as Emmanuel Ogbah was, Shaq Lawson played his role very well. Having a rotation and stable of edge rushers will only help this team. So let's take a look at some of the players that the Dolphins are going to be working with, starting on the defensive line. So the Dolphins will be working with defensive lineman Jonathan Cooper from Ohio State, Levi Onwuzurike from Washington, Osa Odighizuwa from UCLA, Rashad Weaver from Pitt, as well as Patrick Jones from Pitt. I'm excited about these two. I think the way Pitt, the way they coached up their defensive line fits a lot with what the Dolphins like to do with setting the edge and playing the run first and then trying to work your way to the quarterback after the fact. And considering that Rashad Weaver's got a body type similar to that of Emmanuel Ogbah, sort of big, lanky, strong at the point of attack, I really do like him as a potential fit. Patrick Jones is more of an athlete. He's got potentially a higher ceiling, but I do find that he gets kind of washed up a lot quicker than Rashad Weaver does. So either one of those guys later in the draft as potential depth pieces on the defensive line, I would be absolutely excited about. There's also Adetokunbo Ogundeji from Notre Dame, Dalen Hayes from Notre Dame, as well as Teron Jackson, Elshison Smith from Northern Iowa, Taquan Graham from Texas. And the only edge player listed to the Dolphins is Shaka Toney from Penn State. Now, it's the difference between edge and defensive line. I mean, you can think about it. If you're a defensive tackle, a nose guard, one of the standard beefy guys in the middle on the defensive line, you're a DL. You're just a defensive lineman. Used to be the D end was listed as just the guy on the outside of the defensive line, but with the way that defenses are played in the modern day, that's not really a fair representation of the position. So they've kind of created over the last 5 years this term edge. And it's just players who are pure pass rushers who aren't really outside linebackers, kind of a tweener position where they can rush the passer, but don't ask them to set the edge to stop the run. Potentially they can be converted to outside linebackers at the next level. The way Miami plays, their defense does not really push for edge position players. Really, we like standard defensive ends, hand in the dirt, set the edge, stop the run. Think Ogbah, Shaq Lawson. So for that reason, it makes sense why the Dolphins weren't given many edge players and that the American team, the Panthers coach team, got the majority of them. So the one edge player the Dolphins did get was Shaka Toney from Penn State. The American team has Carlos Basham Jr. on the defensive line, Cameron Sample, Malik Herring, Peyton Turner, and then Marlon Tuipulotu. Those are just regular defensive linemen. The Panthers, because they run a more traditional 4-3 style defense, makes sense that the Senior Bowl allotted them more of those edge players. So those are Quincy Roche from Miami, another mid-round guy who doesn't really fit with what the Dolphins like to do, but I think as a developmental prospect, really exciting. He kind of has that bend you like to see, and again, he went to the U, so it doesn't hurt. The Panthers coaching staff will also get to work with Janarius Robinson from Florida State and William Bradley King out of Baylor. The linebacker position, the Dolphins really got a haul here. Garrett Wallow from TCU, as well as Hamilcar Rashed Jr. from Oregon State, good player. one of my favorite players in this Senior Bowl, Justin Hilliard from Ohio State, linebacker, as well as Baron Browning and Tuff Borland, also from Ohio State. So LBU, Ohio State, Jerome Baker will be happy to see that the Dolphins got their hands on every single one of the eligible linebackers from the Ohio State University. The other guy to really keep an eye on and who's really, brought a lot of buzz to the Senior Bowl is Chaz Surratt from UNC. He's kind of a modern day linebacker, and people really like to compare him favorably to some of the modern day guys. I do think he's a little small and might have issues getting off blocks, but if he's able to work on some strength and his arms aren't as long as you would want, which is sort of why he gets a potentially big guard at the NFL level could sort of eat him up. So that's why I think it's huge that the Dolphins get to see these guys up close and personal. Also, the Dolphins are working with Tony Fields from West Virginia and Derek Barnes from Purdue. The American team got to see Patty Fisher from Northwestern, Charles Snowden, no relation to Edward Snowden, from Virginia, Rolly Cole from Southern Alabama, Jabril Cox from LSU, one of my favorite linebackers in the draft. Take a look at some Jabril Cox film. He transferred to LSU from North Dakota State University. He's a monster. He's an athletic freak. I think he's kind of the definition of the modern, linebacker. Very Devin White-ish. Speaking of playoff football, he attacks and flies around the field, hits hard, and he's just moving at 110 miles an hour. So I'm a big fan of Jabril Cox, and I'm excited to see where he ends up, and if other draft pundits view him as favorably as I do. Grant Stewart from Houston, Monty Rice from Georgia, KJ Britt from Auburn, as well as Jordan Smith from University of Alabama, Birmingham. The defensive back position, the Dolphins are working with a lot of guys. Perhaps the best named guy, if not McMath, as we spoke about last week, Divine Diablo, defensive back, Divine Diablo from Virginia Tech. So your first name is Divine and your last name is Fire in Spanish. Like, that is awesome. Divine Diablo. Keith Taylor from Washington, Thomas Green Jr. from Oregon, Trey Brown from Oklahoma, Ambry Thomas from Michigan, Cameron Bynum from Cal, who has experience working with Gerald Alexander, who was hired as a Dolphins defensive backs coach last season. So there is a connection there between Cameron Bynum and the Dolphins. Darius Williams from Oklahoma State, Damar Hamlin, Trey Norwood, Benjamin St. Juste, and Darren Hall. The American team will be working with Joshua Bledsoe from Mizzou, DJ Daniel from Georgia, Tyree Gillespie from Mizzou as well as some standouts like Jacoby Stevens from LSU and Hamza Nasir-Ul-Din from Florida State. There are also a few other DBs, but no one really worth noting on the American side. Overall, this is just a big opportunity for a lot of these unknown guys. Perhaps they're from smaller schools, smaller conferences, not a lot of eyes from NFL scouts, but they get to work directly with Josh Boyer, Brian Flores, and the rest of the defensive staff to make their mark and potentially get drafted into the NFL. So names are going to be popping up throughout the week. Guys who flash and show some serious promise, guys who make big plays, some exciting interceptions. You're going to hear a lot of names throughout the week. Guys I'm personally excited to see the Dolphins work with, Rashad Weaver from Pitt, as I mentioned, as well as the two linebackers, Justin Hilliard from Ohio State and Chaz Surratt from UNC. Overall, I think this is a great opportunity for the Dolphins to bolster both their offensive side of the football and defensive side of the football with up-close and personal looks at some of the best that the next level has to offer.
And if you believe Adam Beasley's, the chatter among the Senior Bowl, Mobile, Alabama, is Dolphins are the front runner for Deshaun Watson, which kind of feels like they're wasting their time at the Senior Bowl. I got to be honest with you.
But aren't the Jets saying the Jets are the front runner?
No.
Smart money on the Jets.
The first report was the report from Armando Salguero was that Deshaun Watson's number one preferred destination is the New York Jets, with the Dolphins being number 2.
So that's going to do it for us today. Thank you guys so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed. Thank you for tuning into this episode of the PhinsPod. As always, I hope you got something out of the episode. Please remember to subscribe to the show wherever it is that you listen, just to never miss a chance to chat about your favorite team, the Miami Dolphins. The show itself, available on all platforms, Spotify, Apple, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, as well as here on YouTube. Continue the conversation with us on Twitter and Instagram at PhinsPod, and check out the site for news and content, PhinsPod.com. I hope you have an amazing day. Please remember to subscribe if you're watching on YouTube and leave a like and a comment as well. Until next time, stay safe. Love y'all.